Hello! This is Reverend Don Lewis coming to you from the beautiful metaverse and more specifically from beautiful Danville, Illinois, homeland of the Corellian tradition. And this is Midday with Reverend Don. And as you know, if you follow Midday with Reverend Don, you can type your question or comment into whatever platform you may happen to be watching on. And it will show up here in my chat room and we can talk directly. I hope you're having a wonderful Wednesday. Um, Today I was going to talk about the Atlantic article that is all the great cause célèbre of the moment. And if you're not familiar with this, there was a rather bitingly anti-pagan article run in the Atlantic magazine, recently written by the Rabbi David Wolpe, who is a fairly well-known rabbi and writer, that basically blames all of the excesses of modern culture on the return of pagan philosophy. Um, and all kinds of pagans are making all kinds of responses to this article and analysis of this article, and I'm going to leave all of that to them. I'm not going to have a lot to say about the article itself, but rather how do we respond to something like this? It's not anything new to us. It's nothing new to our community, but it has been something we haven't seen as much of in recent years. And hello to Mary in the chat room. It's good to see you, Mary. Um, a number of people are making the comment that the rabbi seems very uneducated about the modern pagan community. I would rather go so far as to guess the rabbi didn't even realize there was a modern pagan community. Nor do I imagine that he cares. I doubt that our opinions are any interest to the author of this article. Hello to Janet in the chat room. I've heard it expressed that he is most likely using the term paganism in a non-religious sense, in more of a philosophical sense, not referencing the modern pagan community at all. And I rather imagine this may very well be true, that, again, I'd be surprised if he even knows we're here. But if we assume this is the case, whose fault is that, if not our own? This is a subject that I very often talk about. Hello to Eve in the chat room. It's good to see you, Eve. And that is carrying our own flag. If people don't know we're here, if they have no idea who we are, that's not necessarily their bad. That's our bad for not being visible, not being part of the world that we are in fact part of. It seems to me, and I've said this 1,000 times, that if we don't like the way we're portrayed in society, then we must portray ourselves. We must present our own image. We must present ourselves as we are, or at least as we see ourselves, if we hope for anyone else to see us that way as well. We cannot assume that they're going to educate themselves on who we are, especially if they don't even know we're here. And even if they do, it's not a realistic assumption. It's not a realistic expectation that they're going to do that. We must take the lead in educating society of who we are, that we're here, and what we actually do and do not stand for. Now, one of the problems with that is, I don't know that as a community we can even agree on that. And hello to Vivian in the chat room. And Vivian says, a lot of people are complaining, blaming pagans for the mess of the world. It's so weird, calling us evil devil worshippers, etc. And that comes back to what I'm saying. If they have such misguided images of us, we really need to make more of an effort to get a realistic image out there. Now, granted, the term pagan has applied to a lot of different people over a long period of time. And for better or worse, it's a relatively controversial word even within our own community. And Rather than uniting around this word, it seems like our community just keeps splintering into smaller and smaller fragments who are less and less relevant and less able to portray themselves to that wider world. Um, but nonetheless, those of us who can really need to make an effort to do that. I was speaking in an earlier program about an event that influenced me greatly very early in my pagan career, which was one of the early pagan spirit gatherings where a group of armed protesters showed up. And although there were hundreds of people in attendance, most of them ran to hide in the woods and left just a handful of elders to deal with the situation. And I pointed out in that earlier program that, going to hide in the woods is not a point of safety, because while you're hiding in the woods, you're hiding alone. And if someone hunts you down in those woods, you will have no one to help you. Um, I think it's very important that we step forward and say who we are, that we identify what we stand for to the extent that we can. And, we cannot really speak for our entire community because our entire community is simply not that coherent. But we can speak for our individual groups, and we can speak perhaps for the majority of our community. And how do we do that? We can write our own articles. I believe this was published as an opinion piece. We can certainly write our own opinion pieces and get them published in various places. We've been doing it for years. We need to do more of it. But when we do it, we need to write them convincingly. We need to write them objectively. We need to write them without excess emotion. Outraged letters are not worth the writing. No one's going to pay attention to them. Well thought out arguments are another matter. I've talked about how it seems to me that people are addicted to outrage these days. And that's true in our community as across the board. But one of the effects of that is that outrage doesn't really do much except inflame the individual. It certainly does not counter an argument. It only deepens it. So if you want to write an opinion piece or an informative article discussing what paganism is, do not do it from a point of view of outrage. Do it from a point of view of education. Do it from a point of view of compassion and realizing that the people you're speaking to may have no idea, not only what modern Western pagans are, but even that we exist. This is one of the best ways to combat this kind of thing. Another thing is all the media we now have at our fingertips, and using that media to portray ourselves the way we wish to be portrayed, the way we perceive ourselves, and doing so in a reasonable and well thought out manner. I think that makes a major change in our situation versus years ago. Doing something like this broadcast was a much more gigantic undertaking, even 10 or 15 years ago, let alone longer. And Vivian says in the chat room, personally, I've tried for over 25 years to teach others, and I've come to the conclusion you can't talk to them. Literally, people get so violent towards me, I just don't say anything. Well, I can only say I have not had that same experience. I'm sorry that you do, but but Vivian goes on to say, I don't say anything, but more articles are a great idea. And so, yes, absolutely. You don't have to enter into a personal conversation to write an article. And hello to Boris in the chat room. It's good to see you, Boris. And hello to Calvin in the chat room. And Calvin comes to us from Raleigh, North Carolina. It's good to see you, Calvin. Good to see you, Boris. There are many ways to represent our community that don't necessarily involve direct personal interaction. And writing and or broadcasting are one of them. Though I will tell you that if you're going to be a media figure, people will recognize you. Over the years, I have often appeared here in Vermilion County. I have appeared on the front page of the commercial news a number of times over the years, and I've been recognized from that in grocery stores and other places. I've appeared in papers in Chicago and other places. So if you're going to be a media personality, you are likely to be recognized. But I will have to say that for the most part, when that's happened, it's always been a pleasant experience for me. Um, Granted, I am probably a more intimidating presence than some, um, but I try not to take that point of view. I try to be as friendly and supportive as possible. And if you are going to be a media presence, that's really what you need to do. Um, if you're going to be a media presence, um, trying to correct ideas about our community and so forth, you need to pursue it um, in a personable and pleasant way, because that is the reaction you're hoping people will have. And hello to Jason in the chat room. It's good to see you, Jason. And I do love seeing everyone in the chat room. I cannot speak too often about this issue. That, again, if we do not like the way that we find ourselves being portrayed in media, we must portray ourselves. No one else is going to change how they portray us to meet our needs. Or at least we have no reasonable expectation of that. It is we who must meet our needs. And on the contrary, particularly those who deliberately misrepresent us, are going to continue doing that no matter what we do. Those who accidentally misrepresent us, they may make changes when they realize that that's what they're doing. People who attack the idea of paganism, not realizing there's a contemporary pagan movement, when they realize that, may choose to use different words, provided that they've done so mistakenly. They may realize this is not the best way to make their own argument. Now, the article that we're talking about basically is a monotheism is the only way type of article. Anyone taking that point of view isn't going to be adopting a positive attitude toward any non-monotheistic religion, and probably any religion other than their own. That is probably the problem that has caused more harm in this world in the last several thousand years than any other, although there certainly are plenty of others. And it's unlikely it's going to be fixed now. The only thing that can fix that is a change in the numbers of differing religions. Hello to Aaron in the chat room. I've had people say to me, what difference do numbers really make? I once had this conversation with a Nicene archpriestess, which is interesting because along with the Corellian tradition, the Fellowship of Isis was one of the largest goddess spirituality organizations on earth. And they should have been able to see clearly the benefit of numbers, because numbers get you a seat at tables. Numbers involve you in these conversations. Hello to Michael in the chat room. And numbers are also part of how the wider world decides whether something is actually a religion or not. And that is a very important point. And in a question like this, the numbers of people who feel a certain way, people who see things a certain way, are very important to the extent to which prejudice can thrive. If the majority of people are not prejudiced, then prejudice will be much harder to promote in society. Still possible, but much harder. And for us as a minority religion, this is something very important for us to consider. I mentioned earlier that our community has a tendency to shatter into still smaller and smaller, and therefore less relevant splinters of itself. Those splinters can't do a damn thing. No one cares what 10 people do in their living room if there are only 10 of them. And no one is going to regard that as a world religion. We need organizations. We need people who speak for significant numbers if we're going to make any change in anything. And we also need media personalities, media work to make any kind of difference in how we're perceived. A couple of outraged letters to the editor are going to have at best a very small effect, as opposed to well thought out media campaigns portraying ourselves as we wish to be portrayed. And hello to Brian in the chat room. And, I think that as a community, we would do very well, and I've said this over the last 50 years many times, to look at other minorities who have been more successful in changing how they were looked at and following their lead. And so often it seems to me that we simply ignore these examples. But, it's always a good idea to do what works, to look at the wider society and see what works. Brian says, I'm always a fan of more thought out plans and initiative over fast emotions. And certainly in cases where you're trying to change people's opinion, well thought out plans and initiative are far more effective than emotional responses. In fact, often I think emotional responses only confirm their prejudices, lead them to think that they're dealing with irrational people, because in a state of emotion, even very rational people can sometimes come off seeming less rational than they are. Brian goes on to say, LGBTQ plus rights was a long battle for marriage. It took years of positive narration, one in the US by an older couple of women, Edie Windsor and Thea Spire. And this is exactly the kind of thing I'm referencing. If we look at the LGBTQ plus community and the ways in which they have worked to combat prejudice against them, this is a very good example of successful strategy and successful action. Obviously not universally successful, but with such deep-seated religious prejudice in the world, universal success is a bit much to ask for. It's like perfect peace, which we've discussed in several programs. You're not likely to get perfect peace, but you can get greater peace. This is something that we need to remember also. We need to be, I think, far more aware as a community that we're not a personal hobby. We are a minority religion, a group of minority religions. And even if we lose sight of that, the people who don't like us are not going to. They certainly perceive us that way. Even if we don't like the idea sometimes of responding that way. And I think looking at how people are reacting to this article, in some ways, is an example of what I'm talking about. Again, there are a lot of people thinking that this person just needs to be educated, as if they've made some sort of mistake in their article. And it is entirely possible, as I say, that they're not really particularly aware of the modern pagan community. But I think it's probably truer that they just don't care that there is one. because they don't see us as anything important, because right now we're not. We don't have enough unified action to be important on anyone's game plan. We are effectively um, we're effectively cannon fodder standing on the edge of the battlefield. And as people, we need to figure that out and realize if we don't take some more organized actions, that's exactly how we will be used in the continually growing religious conflicts that society is facing. We are a very handy scapegoat, which is what this article is about. And our unwillingness to organize and work together only makes us defenseless in the face of continuing opposition to our mere existence. How do we deal with that? How do we combat that? At one time, I was at different times vice president and president of the Northeast Florida Pagan Leadership Coalition. And when they first formed, my advice to them, based on my experience in the Chicago Pagan Leadership Coalition, or Pagan Leadership Conference, rather, although it was known by both names at different times, was that those who can work together should work together. And I think I'll go a little farther and say those who can work together really must work together. And those who can't do not need to be involved, because they're only going to sabotage the works. An awful lot of our community just emphatically does not want to work together. I consider that a huge weakness on the part of our community. I consider it a deep character flaw on the part of many of the individuals in our community, in no uncertain terms. But it's also a given that cannot really be changed easily. But those of us who can work together, those of us who can work to promote our image, work to promote our interests in society, work to promote a better position for our community and society, we need to work together. We need to be on good terms with one another, and wherever possible, we need to combine our efforts. And if we look back historically when we have done this, it has been successful. Probably the most colorful one I can think of is the Goddess 2000 campaign, when pagans around the world who often came from traditions that were not necessarily on good terms were nonetheless able to work together on a global art project, which was the Goddess 2000 project headed by Abby Willowroot, whose sole mission was to place an artwork of the goddess on every street corner. And they were relatively successful in doing so, and in getting people to set aside their differences to do that. Hello to Sured in the chat room. Sured reminds me of the Helms Amendment. How many of you remember the Helms Amendment? Let me tell you about the Helms Amendment. The Helms Amendment, back in the 1980s, was an amendment to disqualify any religious movement that used the term witchcraft from being recognized as a religion in the United States. And it was introduced by Senator Jesse Helms, a generally evil man who did a lot of evil things, particularly on the HIV front. But this was another evil thing he tried to do. And pagans from many different backgrounds came together to work against this, to educate members of Congress on religious witchcraft, to educate the wider society on religious witchcraft. And we were able to get this thing turned down. I was actually in Washington, D.C. when the final vote was held, and I remember that shortly after it started raining, which I and the people I was with took as a blessing. Sir Edward is reminding us of the Lady Liberty League, which has done so much to advance civil rights. And Calvin has reminded us of the ACLU in the same way. There are a number of very effective organizations out there. Another example of a time when we were able to work together is the Pentacle Quest. How many of you remember the Pentacle Quest? I'm often shocked that people don't, because this was not that long ago. And that was the 10-year-long quest to earn for pagan veterans, um, particularly Wiccan veterans, the right to have the pentagram as a pentacle on their tombstone. Um, this was a quest that was particularly championed by Selena Fox and Pete Pathfinder Davis of Circle and the Aquarian Tabernacle Church, respectively. I was also involved in it. A number of other people were involved in it. And it took a long time to finally get through. And the way that it finally got through was, A, enough of us were working together to make it a newsworthy situation. And we had the good sense presented not as a matter of pagan rights, but as a matter of veterans' rights, that if you were a pagan who had served your country, of course you had the same right anyone else had to have your religious symbol on your tombstone. That was the argument that ultimately won. But the reason that argument could be made is that so many of us were able to come together and work together to make it possible. This is what comes from cooperation. This is what comes from mutual planning. This is what comes from numbers and why they're important. Um, oh, and we have a troll representing a psychic hack. If you are seeing this message in the chat room, please do not be fooled by such nonsense. No legitimate psychic would ever do something like that. And this too is one of the things we have to work against as a community, because there are lots of people who also will portray us in ways that we do not want to be portrayed. I used to work with someone who, when asked why we were so quick to step in front of the cameras, answered because there were other people we'd really not want to have in front of the cameras, and we wanted to make sure we were the ones who were there so that we could give a good image and good information. And this is also something for us to watch as we go forward, to make sure that, again, not only are we presenting the image that we want people to see, but also to combat negative images when they come up. One of the things that's happened to me repeatedly over the years, because I've done a number of photos for Getty Images, and therefore my photo will often come up on anything dealing with paganism or witchcraft that is using a stock image. And it's come up on things as completely unrelated to me as the practice of moody magic in Africa. And one of the things that usually happens when this occurs is that people who know me will often go and comment on those articles and correct misinterpretations that they are promoting. This is another way to present our image in a positive way. But again, through reasoned argument, positive presentation, and not rampant emotion. And hello to Tina in the chat room, who says hi and happy everything and a Merry New Year. Thank you, Tina. And a Merry New Year to you too. And I see we've come to the end of our half hour. I hope you found these thoughts helpful, and I hope that you think about them as we go forward, because every one of us has the chance to portray our movement at one time or another, and to educate other people. And I think it's important that we remember, maybe it's not fair that we are all ambassadors of modern paganism, but we are. And how we present ourselves, how we interact with people, is always influential. And we should be mindful of that. And with that, I thank you for joining me, and let us close with our prayer as we always do. Divine Mother Goddess, Divine Father God, beloved ancestors, we thank you for all that you do for us in our lives, and we rejoice in your presence in our lives. And we ask you to help us to create positive images and positive reactions to who and what we are, to what we believe in. Help us to be mindful that we live in a wider world where not everyone knows and understands us, and to take the responsibility to help people to understand better. Beloved Mother Goddess, beloved Father God, beloved ancestors, we thank you with love and with respect. And from respect, knowing you are always with us, still we thank you for your presence, and may you be blessed now and always. I thank you for your presence, and may you be blessed now and always, and I will see you tomorrow.